I like when I preach and things like that, I always try to connect with, how does God connect to us? How does the Old Testament, the New Testament, how do they all relate to each other? And we talked a little bit, actually, Ron talked about it yesterday, I think, when talking about Pentecost, that, there's a connection between Elijah and Moses and Pentecost when we think of the words um, with what came down on Pentecost. So when we think of the Holy Spirit, what were the two descriptions that came down? Came down, what sound did it make? When the Holy Spirit came down on disciples, it was a violent wind, and then the tongues of fire. Well, other versions, when we think of fire and wind, that happened, possibly right, here, with Elijah when he was in a cave, when he went to meet God, and there was a violent wind that shattered rocks, but God was not in the wind. And there was fire, but God was not in the fire. And then there was
airplanes.
Yeah, there's airplanes. There was earthquake, but God wasn't there. But it was in that small whisper. Is that military?
Airways.
So, and then if we go back, before that, like I talked about with the Tower of Babel, that was when worldkind, we were confused with our language and we were spread apart like
I can't hear you. Wow.
I know. So anyway, God, when we were spread out across the earth, that was not God's intention. In fact, God said to Abraham to be a blessing to the world. And then as Christians, we are to be called to go into the world to baptize all nations. And then when Jesus left us and the Holy Spirit came down in that fire and in that wind, that's when I think of, in that moment, God uses those things to meet us. And then in other moments, like with Elijah, that sometimes when he's not choosing crazy things to meet us, it's in those small whispers. And even what Carol had said yesterday about, when did you meet God and when was that experience? I think for most of us, though, it was in those quiet whispers, not necessarily in tongues of fire. Or it's in those small, intimate times we meet God. And so I thought it was very apt that yesterday you said, talk about those times when you've met God, because that's more meaningful and more real, I think, because, while miracles can happen, for the most part, God shows us in very small, meaningful ways. So I'll pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for another place where we can see a piece of where, our history with you and mankind. I pray that as we learn about this place and walk around here, that we can remember that while you can display yourself in awesome ways, you most often choose to talk to us in whispers. And I pray that as we are here on this trip, as we're here right now, that Holy Spirit, that you whisper to us, you give us direction and guidance, you connect us to our past, to our present, and you help us in every way be more like you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.